I had actual numbers mathematically accurate for how good the horse should be against the infantry, but it was never quite right because of the padding issue in large numbers. If you had one horse, one hussar against one guy, it worked perfect. But if I have 100 hussars against 100 guys, now it starts messing up.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
All right, welcome. Here I am with game designer Sandy Peterson, and I'm so excited for a great conversation. So welcome. So let's start out, Sandy. Tell me a little bit about who you are, where you come from. What's your story?
Hey, well, I'm Sandy Peterson. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. I've moved around Utah, California, Maryland to various game companies. Spent more time in Texas than anywhere else. I'm currently back in Utah because my elderly parents begged for us to come help take care of them. So I feel kind of dumb at my age moving back into my dad's basement, but whatever. I do still have my house in Texas, which is now a bed and breakfast. So yay, I guess. Um, I've all my entire adult life has been spent as a game designer. I started out doing role-playing games. I'm most famous there for Call of Cthulhu, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's like Dungeons and Dragons, except it's in modern times and it's like a horror movie. There's like werewolves and aliens and stuff. I spent 25 years or so in video games. Worked on the original Civilization by Sid Meier. Worked on Doom, Quake, and the Age of Empires series, Halo Wars, and now I am doing tabletop board games and role-playing games again, which you can access if you go to shop.petersongames.com. And as long as I'm plugging myself, I'll plug this. I have a Patreon at Sandy of Cthulhu, which you can, which I give game ideas and advice, mostly for role-playing stuff. But I also download STLs of monsters and things like that. You can print it on your own. And I have a X account, which you can subscribe to. And the X account, I publish a lot of. That's where, if you're interested in the Age of Empire stuff, that's where I post most of the Age of Empire stuff on X.
I follow you on X, and I can, as the Age of Empires fan, there's a lot of just fascinating kind of behind the scenes content. So I'd highly recommend following you there.
Yeah,
For sure.
recently, I think what I did today was about how I picked the campaigns for the Conquerors, and why there's three campaigns for the three main civs. I didn't do one for the Mayans because who knows any Mayan king's campaign, right? So they just got to be the enemy. Then I did a bunch of one-offs, and then we suddenly got sandbagged by Microsoft, and so they said you must add the Koreans. So we had to well, we don't have time to do a whole campaign. We'll do one scenario, and that's what we did.
Nice. So before we I feel like the Age of Empires is going to be kind of the bulk of our discussion because that's where I like to nerd out. But I want to get into some of these other games. What year did you start being a game designer, and what was the state of the gaming world at that time?
So, I mean, if you count my tabletop role-playing stuff, then my first published game was 1980. Which was a Call of Cthulhu. I did a couple of expansions for games before then. I was actually still in college at the time, and I was married, but I was in college. I graduated and went to then in graduate school, which I never got my graduate degree because I dropped out and became a full-time game designer, which I'm not recommending to anyone, but that's what I did. Um, I eventually went to Chaosium and did lots of role-playing games. I did Call of Cthulhu. I did a Ghostbusters game. I worked on other such products, ElfQuest, and lots of expansions for them. Then in 1988, I decided that there was no money in role-playing games, which was probably partially because Chaosium made all of its decisions in the warehouse, smoking a great big hooter that they'd pass around. And I did not participate, but I was always there, so I got plenty of secondhand smoke. They always politely handed it to me, then I'd hand it to the next guy, and didn't want to inhale it. But so the business decisions were maybe suspect. So anyway, I left. I went to Microprose Software in Maryland, where I worked on did some of my games of my own. That's where I worked on Civilization, among other things, Sword of the Samurai, stuff like that. And then when Microsoft Micro Prose went haywire because Bill Staley basically went insane. Um, and I left, and then I got a job at id Software, and that's where I did Doom 2, and Quake in Dallas area. And by this time, my wife had sent tap roofs down into Dallas 30 feet deep, and I couldn't move to another state. So when id Software kind of caved in after Quake, like almost everyone that was the core of id Software left after Quake. Uh, it was a kind of a death march there at the end. And so I went to Ensemble Studios, where I was there right during the final stages of Age 1, and then we went. I was with Ensemble Studios till the end when Don Matrick killed us. After
Mm.
that, I taught briefly for 2 years at Southern Methodist University. So if you'd been a student of the Guildhall in 2009 to 2011, you could have learned game design from me in a classroom. Uh,
Wow.
then in 2013, I founded Peterson Games, which does tabletop strategy board games, such as Cthulhu Wars is probably my most infamous one, but I've got others.
Fascinating, fascinating. So I had a lot of friends that were into Civilization. That was kind of one of those early like strategy type games. What can you tell me about Civilization? Was
Okay, well,
like
Sid Meier
unique?
and Bruce Shelley did the lion's share in Civilization. I just was involved, but I did do work on it for sure. So, like, the main thing that you're gonna see from me on Civilization is the Elvises was my idea. If you remember them, when you have unemployed people in your Civ, and they become Elvises,
Oh,
that was my suggestion. Um,
huh.
but we knew we were onto something with Civilization because uh Microprose had a large playtest team, and the playtest team was always on crunch time because they were always doing some game that needed to be finished right now. Right, so they always were under the gun, and they never got time off. Like me, a game designer, I'm doing a game. I work on the game, and then near the end it ramps up, and it's really tight, and then I finish it and go on to the next game. But for the testers, it's always ramped up because they're only on the game at the end.
Mm.
So when they're done with their shift, they go home and I guess get drunk or crash. They're like done. But with Civilization, they would stay late and keep playing it just with each other for fun. So we knew we were onto something then, and that became the golden nail for me, is that if I saw the playtesters stay in to play a game, I knew it was cool. So we saw that with Doom, we saw that with Age of Empires. Um, so it was that was always the goal. Get the testers to stay late. We don't ask them to, we'll watch, and if they do, then we know we got a winner.
Nice, nice. Okay, so you mentioned Doom. What can you tell me about Doom and the creation of that game?
Well, I did most of the levels on Doom. Its software was very different from Ensemble Studios. Basically, every game company has its own style, its own way of doing things, and the way it worked in uh, Ensemble Studios was that it was kind of like a band of brothers. Like everyone liked each other. We all got along well. We were just pals. In fact, one of the requirements for hiring someone new was that we didn't tell the guy this, but like if we're in the elevator with this guy and it breaks down and we're stuck there for 3 hours, is that going to be okay? We have something to talk about. And it probably made it too hard to hire new people and have that one of the requirements, but we did. And so everyone was like, we had super low turnover. It was very rare for anyone to leave Ensemble Studios. Well, in software, going back to that was more like if you've seen a nature documentary about a bunch of hyenas or African hunting dogs eating the dead zebra, they're snarling at each other and they're snapping and yapping. It's not a very pleasant thing to watch. Now, the zebra vanishes pretty quick, so it's an efficient process. But that was more like what it was in software, is that there was a lot of backbiting and uh, thing slings going back and forth, and people trying to fix things that didn't need to be fixed, and people not fixing things that did need to be fixed. And in the it may seem dysfunctional, but we did like each other, and we did work together, and we all worked like demons, and everyone there was really smart. So it kind of We were able to produce Doom 2, and Quake. And then Quake basically didn't kill the company. The company went on, but after Quake, Michael Abrash left, who was like the best programmer ever. Dave Taylor left, I left, John Romero left, Sean Green left. I mean, it just devastated the company. It wasn't the same people after that. It was a different team. And
So
A.T. Carmack stuck around for a while. He was the main artist and an owner, but eventually they drove him out.
So I remember growing up, there was like controversy over Doom that people thought it had evil themes to it. It was like a bad influence on kids. What can you tell
Well,
me
I
about
mean,
that?
it's you're going to hell and shooting demons, right? So I guess, is that bad? Is it bad to shoot demons? Should we let the demons do whatever they want? It's like, yeah, I know people said that. Well, so on the right, there was some Christian people who all they knew about Doom is that there was like demonic imagery, which there is, because it's like hell's interior decorator. Um, but in fact, in Quake, we did some art that were Christ, and it wasn't sacrilegious images, it was just images of Christ. And so they said, and they asked me, because most of the guys at id Software are all atheists, right, or agnostic, and they would say, is this okay to have this? I said, I have no problem with an image of Christ in a game. Okay, we're not mocking it. There was at one place where John Romero put the picture of Christ's face on a floor plate you had to step on to open a bridge, and I said, I don't think you should have Jesus's face where you can step on it. And he goes, oh yeah, good call. But in general, but I thought, but yeah, but on the right they said, there's demonic imagery, so it must be devil stuff. But of course they didn't play it. And on the left they said, there's guns and you're shooting people, and so that's violent, so it's bad and you shouldn't play it. But I will say that the politicians who tried to ban me were all Democrats. They
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that? What
I
was
don't
their
know.
what was their motive?
Tipper Gore and oh, what's it?
Like
Forget his name.
violence?
The Jewish candidate for vice president in 2000. Believe it or not,
Lieberman.
Democrats turned on him.
Lieberman?
Yeah, Joe Lieberman. Joe Lieberman and
Yeah.
Tipper Gore held up copies of my game in Congress and condemned it for causing school shootings. And
Oh,
I was
that's
kind of sad
wild
because
that
I
both
sort of like Joe
sides.
Lieberman. But oh well. The Republicans never tried to ban me, to their credit. Though I got preached against, even in my own church, there was guys preaching against me. Not like
Really?
leaders of the church who understand, like, you know, people would do like um a editorial in a newspaper and say, "Oh, Doom's this satanic game. Don't watch and see if your kids are playing it." But I just always figured that if the demons are bad, then I should shoot them. I mean, of course, I know in reality
Yeah.
you can't shoot a demon to get rid of them, but it would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. So I wanted to kind of bring in an entry there. You are not a demon worshiper. Obviously, you want to shoot them, but
No,
you're
no.
also you're also a man of faith, right?
Yes.
And that kind of
Yeah,
has
yeah.
informed your
I
game
actually
creation.
teach Sunday school to hardened 17-year-olds at my chapel on Sunday. Um, so yeah, I pray over my meals. I pray every night before I go to bed with my wife. She prays more than I do, but I do pray at most of the meals and at bedtime. And yeah, I now, that said, I mean, for example, one of the things I'm most famous for is my connection to Lovecraft and Cthulhu. And Lovecraft is famously an atheist. Although he kind of
Hmm.
liked religion, he just didn't believe in it. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't have to share his beliefs to enjoy his stories. And
That's
yes,
very interesting. How do you think that your faith has shaped your game design?
it has probably shaped it in a lot of ways. One of the ways that it shaped it is, I think, there's a shallow type of faith which thinks the good guys are always going to win. But if you look at the actual history of Christianity and pre right, that is not the case. The bad guys win a lot, you know, and so I'm okay with that darker tone.
Hmm.
I think it's helped me because especially my church is very interested in history. For example, you probably are aware of this. We have the family tree website, or not website, the app.
Oh, I've seen that
Yeah,
actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's my church. You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and we have a deposit repository under a mountain in Salt Lake City with all everyone's family name. As far we have teams of guys going to every country you can get into and photographing all the records, so you can find out anything. So we're always very keen on that. So for a while, I lorded it over my wife because I found out that two of my ancestors were on the Mayflower. So I was really then I found out that she had one that came over in Jamestown, and
She beat you.
and then, well, he beat me, yeah. And then she went back home, which is why she wasn't killed with the rest of Jamestown. But that was earlier than my Mayflower people. So,
Wow, that's
so,
exciting stuff.
and the knowledge of history was super useful in Age of Empires.
Yeah, let's get into Age of Empires because that was just a formative part of my childhood and adolescence. Tell me about the creation of that series.
Okay, so I got there when it was only the last few months of Age of Empires. It wasn't done yet, but Rick Goodman, Tony Goodman's brother, was the designer, and he's a great designer. Very obsessed, very weird guy, which is the case of a lot of game designers, as you can see by looking at me. But so I got there, and he was working on that, and they set me to work on a game called Sorceress, okay, which is going to be a fantasy game, RTS game where you'd cast spells, and I had it all work out. So the way it would work is that you didn't like build buildings that you'd go like, for example, you go to a forest where you could evoke, and you could turn the forest into a grove, and you could upgrade the grove into like living trees, and then you can get elves out of them and tower, and you'd upgrade crystals into to the point where you can get rock golems out of them, and you'd go around and be making your spells with your leader, and I had this was going to be our next big game after Age of Empires. Now the idea behind Age of Empires, the selling point that we did in the stores was that it was a cross between Civilization, because Bruce Shelley, who was ostensibly designing Age of Empires, but actually he was just a front man. I'm not blaming him for this. That was Bruce Shelley's job, to be the front man, so we didn't have to be harassed by the media. Um, so it was that he'd worked in Civilization, though. So the idea was that it was a cross between Warcraft, the RTS game, and Civilization. But it wasn't, of course. It was just Warcraft, set historically. There's no aspect of Civilization in it, really. Um, anyway, I was doing the fantasy game, and then they started working at Age 2, which was a bigger, more profound, more expansive game. And so they took away my programmers one by one. They took away my artists. They basically, eventually I was down to one artist and one programmer and me. And so I went to him and I said, "Hey, you know what? We can't do Sorceress with three guys. It's supposed to be a full RTS game, and it's just not going to happen." And so I said, "What if instead we do an expansion for Age of Empires?" And that's where Rise of Rome came from. And of course,
That
it was a
was
massive success.
yeah. Tell me about that expansion because that was
Okay, so
exciting
what
to
happened is
play.
I said, I got experience working on when I worked on like Call of Cthulhu, and other role playing games. The majority of the sales that we made were expansions and adventures. They weren't the core game. Like, now each individual expansion we sold maybe 25 to 35% as many as the core game. But when you have like 30 expansions, you're selling a lot more than the core game. And they're way cheaper to make than the core game. They don't have to be in a box. They don't need dice. They don't need it's way cheaper. So I said, we'll do an expansion for Age of Empires, and it will be less expensive. It'll be easy to do because I can do it with 3 or 4 guys. It'll take a few months. We'll have this expansion, and Microsoft comes in and says, "You shouldn't do expansions. Expansions never sell." And they didn't realize what I was going to do. I wasn't going to do an expansion that had new solo adventures, which is pretty much the only kind of expansions that had ever existed up to then. This expansion was going to add new civilizations, which it did. Added the Romans and 3 more. So a whole new, and they only made little adjustments to all the other civilizations, as you know, little changes to them. New units like the Scythe Chariot, you know, and stuff like that. So like if you got the expansion, you sort of got to restart Age of Empires all over again with new stuff, which was obviously pretty appealing. So we kind of forced it down Microsoft's throat. I championed it and says, we're going to do this. It's going to be a big seller. And what happened, it was a huge seller. It just like with Call of Cthulhu, it sold maybe 30% as many copies, 35% as many as the core game. But since it costs about 5% as much, that's huge. And then Microsoft found out that when they released it, like about a year after Age of Empires came out, it boosted sales of the main game because you'd go into the store, you'd see Age of Empires and an expansion, and you were like, oh, maybe I should get this game. It's got an expansion. And then a year or two after that, after Age of Empires 2 came out, they did the gold pack with them both in the same box, and that boosted the core game again. So it was the gift that kept on giving. And then when we were near the end of Age of Empires 2, the Microsoft comes in all pompous and says, "We have learned that expansions are a really big hit." And I said, "Yep, sure did." So then I did the Conquerors for that. And one of the results of this is that because I was doing, uh, even though I was brought in to be like a lead designer to do a full game, because I did the Rise of Rome for the first 4 or 5 months of Age 2, I wasn't there on that project. So then I came on when I finished Rise of Rome. So I was like not not one of the leads. I was in charge of a lot of things. I did the campaigns and I did the balancing and named the units and I did all the stuff, but I wasn't a lead guy. And then at the end of Age of Empires 2, they said, now you must do an expansion for Age of Empires 2. So I did the Conquerors for 5 or 6 months. And then when that was finished, Age 3 had already started. So again, I wasn't the lead on Age 3. So I was always a bridesmaid, never a bride. And then at the end of Age 3, of course, I did the War Chiefs. So I was the expansion guy that they loved.
Nice.
And I
That's
like doing that. The expansions were fun. I like doing them because I was more in charge than I would have been on a big project because there wasn't as much at stake on it, and he trusted me. And it was a smaller project, so I didn't have to manage 30 guys. I had to manage like 5 or 6 guys, which is much more pleasant. And it's one of the reasons that eventually, when Ensemble Studios was killed, that I decided to go back to making tabletop board games because I can do that with a small team, and you know.
so. What is your favorite civilization to play as if you're playing personally?
Okay, so the thing is that when I'm testing the game, remember, my job is to test all the civs to make them balanced, right? So the civ that I'm spending the most time on and devoting the most love to is always the civilization that's having the hardest time. So it's always the suckiest civ, right? That's the one I'm trying to
Ah.
fix to make better. But if I didn't have to do that, it would probably I don't know, probably one of the war chiefs civs. You know,
Oh, okay.
those
Why is that?
I'm very proud of the work I did in those. And one of the features there, so Age 3 comes out and they say, so here's a little story. I don't know. I'm telling all these stories. Maybe you have questions you'd rather ask. But Age 3, what happened is that everyone assumed that for the expansion it would be the Asian civs. I do Japan, China, Korea, and like that. And I said that's dumb because the Asians didn't come and colonize the New World. I mean, they could have obviously, but they did not. And so what I want to do is have the Native American civs for Age 3, because as you know, Age 3 is totally colonial in the New World.
Mm,
So I want to have Native Americans, and I like that idea because I can have the Native Americans be really different from the European civs, you know. And I thought that would be fun. And also, we were at that time we were all being influenced by StarCraft, where we were all amazed that StarCraft had such
mm,
different. That's why Age of Mythology is the way it is because of StarCraft.
mm,
We gotta beat StarCraft in its own game. We got to do something like that. So I was doing that with the with the War Chiefs. And the thing is, so I had to argue for the War Chiefs all the way up from my own guys clear to the upper management. And every step of the way, I convinced them that it was the right thing to do. So I was very proud of that from a corporate point of view. But then when we did them, the first one I did was the Iroquois, which I now think are called the Haudenosaunee in the rules, but Iroquois, whatever. So I did them, and I first brought them into the playtests, and immediately they were like the most popular civilization. Everyone
mm.
just raved about the Iroquois, and I asked them, "Why do you like the? Have you played them?"
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I asked one of them, why do you like the Iroquois so much? He says, because you have all these little crappy siege weapons that you go blow up his town with, which is really part of what they have, right? And they liked having the guys that could stealth out of way. They liked going back and putting people on uh the dance the dance hall, you know. And so the second one I did was the Aztecs, and of course they loved the Aztecs. The
Mm,
Aztecs were going to be challenging because no horses, no gunpowder was my rule. But I had workarounds. There's the Eagle Warriors, and there's the Arrow Knights, and so they kind of worked out anyway. And of course the Aztecs look so cool. Everyone wanted to play them. And then when I brought in the Sioux, my goal was they'd be the most popular. And the Sioux were also popular, but I'd already kind of shot my bolt with the Iroquois and the Aztecs. So while they liked the Sioux and everyone liked playing them, it was hard to surpass what I'd done in the previous two. So,
mm.
but the point is that the native Civ were super big hits, and I felt very proud of myself. I was
When you
the walk.
when you look across all the different Age of Empires and all the expansions and everything, what are some of your favorite units? Like military units to like if I could create just like a handful of these to go attack.
For some reason, I always really liked chariots. I think because I felt sorry for them because they have such an awkward animation and they jerk
Uh,
around as they move. But if you can get them charging in one line, they look really cool. So
mm,
I like that. And I always loved priests, and I was sad that Ian and Mark, the leads on Age 2, kind of nerfed the priests so they weren't as awesome as they were on Age 1. Because the
mm.
Age 1 priests were so fine, converting things and converting your siege weapons and your elephants and stuff. It was just hilarious. And I kind of wish they'd been brave enough to leave that in for Age 2 as strong as it could have been.
That
Um,
was a huge thing for sure. The priest just converting units.
I know. Another unit I really like is the Pharaoh from Age of Mythology. He's pretty hip, and I like that a lot. The war chiefs are pretty cool too because they can convert. I mean, the Pharaoh converts animals to your cause, right? So you can actually
Oh
lead a little
yeah.
raid into the enemy town with like wolves and lions and stuff, and attack them. And that's always doesn't win you the game, but it's fun and it's obnoxious and you know.
Yeah, man. Wow. Talk about Age of Mythology for a second, because I remember that was just a completely different, I mean, like a similar like foundation of the game with different civilizations and
Yeah.
stuff,
Well,
but like there's giants, there's all kinds of different stuff in
there
Age of
was this
Mythology.
huge discussion over what we should do um after Age 2, and we kind of split our bets, and some of us went onto Age of Mythology and some onto Age 3, and then it was like, what are we going to do after Age 3? And of course, our plan was after Age 3 and Age of Mythology is we do Age 4, which would take us from basically uh Musketeer times up to World War One. And then our ultimate plan, the problem we faced with that is that if we're having guys like during the Civil War and that time period, the Mexican War, like the whole concept of Age 1 is that you're just rising out of the Stone Age, so you just have a town center and three guys. And then
Mm,
the concept of Age 2 is when the Roman Empire collapsed, everyone was dead, so we had to start again with the town center and three guys. Okay, and then in Age 3, we're colonizing the world, so you have a town center and three guys. So everything is a town center and three guys. But we couldn't justify having a town center and three guys starting in like 1820. So we couldn't
mm,
figure out how we were going to do that. We didn't want to start you with a whole town exactly, um, but we were debating different ways of doing it. And in the end, we didn't do it, and we got killed by Don Matrick. But
mm,
well, actually, what we did was our plan was that we were going to do um, an MMO. Everyone in the company had been playing a lot of World of Warcraft, and we thought
mm,
we understood it and could make a better version of it. So we got together and made the plan. We'll do a MMO based on Halo, okay? And it will have the Halo license, and the factions will be the Covenant and the and the humans, and we'll have this whole big world. And I was in charge of all of the lore and the background and the world building, so I was pretty excited to do this. And we got it all worked out. And what happened is Don Matrick, he was a hatchet man for EA. He gets hired to be in charge of Microsoft Game Studios. And his deal at Microsoft is that you got to make Microsoft Game Studios profitable in 3 years to get the big benefits. Okay. Now, my company, Ensemble Studios, obviously, we never sold less than 3 million copies of anything. We were like hugely profitable, right? But our plan for Halo, for the Halo MMO, which we call Titan, was that it would take us 3.5 years to complete. We didn't want to skimp on it. We wanted to go out there and be huge. Okay. And every estimate we did, or that Microsoft did, for how much money this would make for Microsoft, the lowest estimate we got was $1.1 billion. That's with a B. So it was going to be this gigantic thing because Ensemble's doing it, and we had the chops. And the Halo license was pretty big then, and Microsoft could put it forth. So we thought this is going to be a huge thing. But you see, in 3 years for Don Matrick, the world ends. So 3.5 years is too long. So his plan was that he would lay us all off after Halo Wars, and then not have to pay for our development for Titan, because we were a very expensive studio. We always delivered, but we were expensive. So that was his plan. But we found out about the plan because Microsoft was too big to keep a secret, and then we negotiated our way so he didn't change the plan, but he gave us a really fat severance bonus, which I used to go on and do other things with. But yeah, so I don't think that canceling us did Microsoft shareholders very good value, because I think that $1.1 billion would have been pretty handy. But it probably increased Don Matrick's pay briefly, except that nothing, maybe not, because I don't think he ever made it. Microsoft Game Studios profitable. He bought Rareware, and then it just fizzled for him. They did Viva Pinata, and didn't really have the same chops they did from before. And then I gotta admit, I giggled when he was kicked out after Xbox Live went down. So that was pretty great.
Wow. So something that I vividly remember from my teenage adolescent years is in the box for Age of Empires 2, there was these booklets that
Yeah.
would describe the civilizations, describe the units, and there was so much history packed in there. And that was one of the big things that inspired me to study history on my own, that made
Awesome.
history
I was the
interesting
guy
to
that had
me.
to write all that stuff.
Yeah, tell me, because it sounds, from following you on Twitter or X, it sounds like y'all did a ton of actual historical research to
Yeah.
make these civilizations as accurate as
Well, I
possible.
was the go-to guy for all this stuff. Like, everyone would come to me and say, "Sandy, what kind of unit should the Russians have for their unique unit?" And I had to come up the Strelets or whatever. I was educating people. I was saying, like, for example, one of the things that people who know a little bit about the Middle Ages is they assume that archers are the super unit, that they shoot knights down all the time because they know about the Battle of Crécy when the British longwomen killed the French knights. And I had to explain, no, knights killed longbows. The reason Crécy is so famous is because it upset the convention. It was like amazing that the longbows killed the knights. The French expected to kill the longbows, not because they were stupid, because that's what mostly happened with them, And so I had to explain these kind of things and get them to understand how the units interacted, where basically infantry killed cavalry that killed archers that killed infantry, is the basic rock, paper, scissors. And I
Wait,
had
could you
to,
say that again?
what? Okay,
Could you say
so
that
the
again?
way it works in Age of Empires 2 is that heavy infantry, like without bows, okay, kill cavalry. When cavalry attacks them, they'll kill the cavalry. You know that.
Yeah.
Swordsman, spear, they'll kill the cavalry, right? But cavalry kills archers. You take a bunch of horses, hussars, and you charge them into the crossbowmen, and they'll take them out, right? But the archers will kill the infantry as long as they can retreat. If you can trap them against a wall, but if they shoot and move away, then obviously they'll kill your infantry, right? Oh yeah, and ranged cavalry, horse archers will kill heavy cavalry, obviously. Um, but they generally get beaten by foot archers, like skirmishers and stuff. So that's kind of the arrangement, and that all came from historical sources. And I propagated that, and then of course when musketeers show up in the Age 3, I had to, then the logic changed, because musketeers are both ranged and heavy, which they can melee and they could shoot. So they kind of covered both those. So cavalry could only really get them when they get them from the flank or the side, but artillery would kill the infantry, the musketeers, and then cavalry would kill the artillery. Which you played H3, you know that that's the interaction. You know,
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating.
it was all this stuff
Um,
within there, and we had to make, and I had to work out the backgrounds. I did all the, I didn't do the adventure, the actual um design of the scenarios, I told the scenario designers what they had to have. I said, we're going to do the Battle of the Mataurus, and this is what it's going to be. And now you're going to do this is the order of the campaign for Genghis Khan, for going through his adventures. And they would like, okay, and then they do that. I didn't have time to also do the levels because I was doing all the unit balancing and everything else, but I'd be the guy, I'd be walking down the hall and some artist would come out and say, Sandy, what does a Turkish mill look like? And and I would take the artist down to half price books and buy all the art books that were appropriate for what they need, for them. I mean,
wow.
the company paid for them, but so they
Yeah.
did a lot of history,
Wow.
and I had to read they assigned me to do a game on pirates. They wanted to do Pirates Diablo. That was one of their ideas that never went
Is that an
anywhere.
offshoot of Age of Empires?
It was no, it was like Diablo, but with pirates. It was a whole new game. And so I went and I learned all this. I know all these facts about pirates that I never got to use because they canceled the project. But now I'm
Wow.
really up on pirates. So there's that.
That's good. So, I mean, one of the fascinating things about this is you can create historical battles that never happened,
Mm-hmm.
and they can be like a historically accurate representation of what it would have been like
What it
if
would have been like,
the
sure,
Britons and the Byzantines or something.
exactly. As an example, an actual battle that occurred uh, about 200 or 300 AD was that the Romans had briefly allied with uh, the Persians, and so there was Roman legions out patrolling the far eastern borders of the Persian Empire, and they met a bunch of Chinese units, and they had a battle between Chinese Chuko-Nu repeating crossbows and a Roman legion. So how cool is that? The
Whoa.
Romans lost, by the way, but maybe they
Really?
were,
Wow. So
or they
the
didn't like the Persians.
Chuko Nu, that's such a fascinating unit in the game. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like an arrow machine gun. Like tell me
Yeah, well,
about
that's
like
what it was.
designing that unit.
It was a semi-automatic thing. Now, the actual power of the bolts of a Chuko-Nu were actually much weaker than a regular crossbow, but the Chinese kind of made up for it by poisoning them. So, Or here's
Wait,
another
what?
example of a cool battle. Okay, that really happened. So in the when Ieyasu, when Hideyoshi took over Japan, he kicked out all the Christian sanity. He said you had to convert from Christianity or die. So the Spanish took 30,000 Christian samurai away with them so they wouldn't be killed by Hideyoshi. Okay. And they said, well, now we have 30,000 samurai. What are we going to do with them? And these samurai were just as rough and tough as the pagan samurai. It's just they wouldn't commit suicide. That was the big difference. Because, Christians don't do that. So they sailed with them down to the Philippines and said, we got these Muslim headhunters causing trouble. Let's fight them. And they're still causing trouble, right? So you had Spanish conquistadors and Japanese samurai fighting Filipino Muslim headhunters. And that was a real campaign that happened. And then the samurai
Wow.
settled down in the Philippines, married Filipino girls, and vanished into the bloodline. There's no trace of them now. But wouldn't that be a great movie?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Man, that's fascinating. So another thing that I think you posted about this on X about Age of Empires about how like if you hear the units talking like a worker unit or a military unit, like you click on them and they say like it's actually in the language of that civilization.
In Age of Empire 2, it's actually in the language, except they didn't allow me to do it for the English because we'd gotten used to the Age of Empires 1 units not speaking English, erectus, mandatus, what they were saying, right? So it sounded wrong for the for the for the artists and programmers when they heard English guys speaking English. So we said, well, fortunately English changed a lot from about after about 1500, so we used older English. And so they sounded funny. Then they were happy with it. But the Germans and the Goths and the Teutons just speak German, the Byzantines speak Greek. Uh,
Huh.
One of the fortunate things I had going for me is that my church, as you know, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we send missionaries all over the world. So like I went on a mission to convert the wicked pagans of Los Angeles. You know, my wife went to Portugal, so we have lots and lots of languages in our church. In fact, last Sunday they were like, "What languages do you speak here in this class?" And we had Bulgarian, um, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Tagalog from the Philippines, all these languages. So it's very cosmopolitan. But I was able to call BYU and say, "Hey, I need someone to speak words in Mayan for me." And they said, "Well, there's 20 different Mayan languages. Like, which one should we use?" I said, "Just pick one. Our guys aren't going to care." We got Mongolian that way, and I thought I had Nahuatl, which is the Aztec language, but apparently whoever said they spoke Nahuatl diddled us, because I've now been told that our Nahuatl isn't real Nahuatl. Either that or
Wow.
pronounced really badly. I don't know.
Wow,
So,
that is fascinating.
so we actually got
S-
the real languages for everyone, and it was
That's
very
so
handy.
cool. Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, this was such an integral part of my childhood, my adolescence, and then seeing you post this behind the scenes stuff on X is just so. I mean, I share it with my brother. He was also a big Age of Empires guy. It's like it's so cool for us to like watch this and observe it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's the real languages, which is a big change from id Software we did, because when they did Wolfenstein, like John Romero himself and the other guys there did the German language for the Nazis that you kill. And it was so bad that when I went to Germany, they said, "What's the language the Nazis speak?" I said, "It's supposed to be German." And they go, "Really? What's this guy saying?" He goes, "Boom, boom, boom." I said, "He's supposed to be saying Schutzstaffel, like an SS." And none of the Germans could understand anything they said. So it was
That's
like so
hilarious.
terrible. Our accents were bad. But on but
So
on Age of Two, except sadly for the Nahuatl, we got it right.
nice. So one of the fascinating things I think about following you, but also that like reminds me a lot of stuff from when I played the game growing up. It's like there's little quirks to the game, little interesting quirks that like if you played the game, you post some of this stuff to just kind of remind you like little funny things. I'm thinking of like a deer attacking a castle, stuff
Yeah.
like that. What can you tell me about those little quirks of the game?
Well, you got to understand that Age of Empires was one of the very most complicated games to ever have been done at that time. It was hugely complicated with many layers of code. And so there is a million billion ways things can go wrong. So if you just wait long enough, one of those things is going to happen, a cosmic ray, and then a deer will attack a castle and you won't be able to stop it. It's just, like one of the things we had happen a lot was that units that you were tasking across the map, they suddenly decided they had to go to location 00 down at the bottom of the map. And I'm sure you've seen armies do that in your games. Okay. And we never could figure out what caused that. Okay. So we did all these workarounds to stop it. And eventually we were able to get it down to less than 1 in 1,000 times, which is still way too often because think how many times you click on an army. Right.
Yeah.
And, uh, and so it's still there. you know we couldn't figure it out, but at least it was rare. And a lot of these things we'd say, if it's less than this often, we'll live with it, because we could spend another 6 weeks just fixing this one tiny bug that happens less than 1,000 times, or we have other bigger bugs to fix that we can work
Mm.
on. And like one of the things we will always give us fits was the pathing for large units versus so like horses and elephants always have trouble attacking packed infantry more than they should, because, well, you know why. You've done it. They can't path to them, right? And they have trouble
Mm.
getting around. They'll fiddle around in the back. And so actually, I had actual numbers mathematically accurate for how good the horse should be against the infantry, but it was never quite right because of the pathing issue in large numbers. If you had one horse, one hussar against one guy, it worked perfect. If I have 100 hussars against 100 guys, now it starts messing up. So I had to
Mm.
I had to work that out. If I have a small group of numbers, the group of guys, the numbers balance. If I have a large group, it doesn't balance. I have to decide, do I want to balance it for the large group or the small group? That was that kind of choice. Then there was things I had to do. For example, like with Age 2, the toughest unit to control is the horse archers, right? They
Mm.
take so much micro, but if you can micro them, they're the best unit by far. So I
Mm.
had to balance them. Do I balance them for the average player who can't really micro them, where they can be caught by hussars and camels and other things? Or do I
Mm.
balance them for the elite players that can micro and thus will kill everything with them? And the
Mm.
problem was that the elite players are the ones that they're going to do YouTube videos. The people are going to be talking about them. They're going to be doing reviews, and everyone thinks they're an elite player. But the fact is, 95% of the players can't manage the horse archers to the same level. So do I balance them for the elite players and have everyone think there's, you know, or balance them for the ordinary players, and then the elite players will like dominate using the horse archers. And what I decided to do was balance it for the ordinary players so that they could have fun with horse archers. So they wouldn't be frustrated trying to imitate the elite guys,
Mm.
and at least they'll be able to control them to an extent. I said, let's make the most people happy instead of making the reviewers happy. So
Mm.
I guess that's smart.
That's that's so fascinating. So you began in the gaming industry in 1980.
Yeah.
How have you seen the industry change over the last 45 years?
Well, I mean, really, you have two completely different industries. You have the paper game industry with tabletop games, and then you have the computer industry. you know and in the computer industry, some of the big changes were, well, when so in the 80s you have Atari dying. They just like put a gun to their head and pulled the trigger, and they were gone. And there was no console games. There was only computer games. And then Nintendo comes over with their console games, but for the first 5 or 6 years they did not allow Americans or anyone but Japanese to do video games for Nintendo. Because they feared that we'd do crappy ones like we did for the Atari, and kill their business. And so they were keeping really tight hold. And then there was lawsuits that forced them to open it up. Um, but once we started doing, and then of course you had Sega coming in, and the Atari, not the Atari, the Amiga, which was basically it wasn't really a console, but was basically a console. And then so the big change in computer gaming was, first there was the consoles, and then the next big change we've had, of course, is phone games, right? And the biggest change I was a part of was when I started working on Doom. I thought that people would not play games head to head, because I tried to do that with a game called Command HQ. Now, Command HQ, Dan Button was the designer, then later became Daniel Barry, but whatever. So this was actually the first RTS game. So if you want to look it up, okay. And we had World War One, World War Two, World War Three, World War Four, and we had all these rules. You'd build units. It was real time. You'd go and fight head to head with the person. And Dan had this idea that because 65% of the people had modems, that this would be good head to head, and it was super fun head to head. And no one played it that way. Almost no one. So it sold only 40,000 copies, and kind of died the death. But then, so when we're doing Doom, I told this story to the other guys at id, and they said, "Yeah, we know no one's going to play this head to head. They're only going to play the single player game, okay? But we're going to leave the head to head in because we think it's fun to shoot each other, because it was." And then, of course, it turned out that what drove Doom was the head to head experience on networks, because it somehow something had happened between 1991 and 1993 that made head to head gaming popular, and Doom is the first one to really take advantage of that, and it became huge. And then every game had to have a head-to-head component. And that's probably the main way you played Age of Empires, right? It all started with Doom, which I was there for. So that was pretty cool. And then we had games you had to play head-to-head, like MMOs. You play
Hmm.
World of Warcraft, you can't play it on your own. You're playing it with a
Hmm.
crowd. and that's part of the fun. So that was this huge thing. And now, so that was the biggest change in gaming that I was involved in. And
What do
the
you think about what do you think about the evolution between like these very highly complex games on like a PC, like Age of Empires, versus something you play on your phone that's like more boiled down, like Clash of Clans?
I think there's a place for them both. I mean, the disadvantage of a giant, huge, complicated, heavy-duty game is that it's always possible that some guy in a suit and tie will come in and says, "Let's add lots of downloadable content they have to pay for," and zero players like that, right? We all hate that, but they do that. You know, if you played, I guess you could argue that if you bought Age of Empires 2, that the Conquerors was downloadable content, but it was more than that. We delivered on the value for the Conquerors, right? You weren't downloading a
Agreed.
skin for Joan of Arc, where she would walk around in a bikini. You were doing like fun stuff, uh, you know. And but there's also a place I think for crazy guys like Concerned Ape doing Stardew Valley. You know, his sleeper hit. There's one guy doing it, and we noticed this when we were doing Doom because we finished Doom, and then these crazy guys come out of Slovakia or somewhere with Serious Sam. You know, they basically bought uh, uh, our engine, and Serious Sam was like a lot of fun. And then we had the guys buying the Age of Empires engine so they could do Star Trek battles.
Hmm.
You know, and we even did a Star Wars game. Well, we didn't do it; they did it, but we rented it out. So I think there's a place for the giant, overblown game, which always has a risk of getting too overblown and weighty. And then, of course, the bigger it gets, the more likely it is that people start getting into it that don't actually play the game; they just want to have their ideologies in it. So you kind of saw that happen to World of Warcraft a little bit. Um, but then you have a place for the little quirky games too. You know, there's a little company out of Czechoslovakia doing Chuchul and Samaros and these little fun toy games for kids. And now the phone games, some of the phone games are big and overblown, some are nice and simple and small, and there's a huge range. And the cycle used to be that a small company did a great game like Doom, then they became a giant company and became ponderous under the weight of their power, and then some another small company would come and make another small game that would punk the big game. And now I think you have everyone living together in the same forest. We have little games, you have big games, we have so many games you can. The advantage of a small quirky game is that it can be something really unusual, you know, and it doesn't have to be something that appeals to the mass market, whatever that is. But remember when Doom came out, no one thought that was a mass market game. They all thought that was this weird game that would fail because it's too violent. Nobody would buy this violent game. And I don't know why Doom is violent. Age of Empires is 1,000 times more violent.
Have you noticed an injection of politics into the gaming world?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've had people try to cancel me because I guess I'm not a girl, you know, or something. Um, but I try to keep politics out. I don't care about the politics of the games. I mean, politics came in to an extent with the Korea in Age of Empires 2 and the Conquerors, because we put the Korean civilization. We had 5 weeks to do them. So the first thing that happened is the Koreans said, "This is the wrong model for a turtle boat. They look like this," and we're like, "We just used the model we saw in the pictures." But they, "No, you must use the right model." So we did that, and then they got mad because we called the Sea of Japan the Sea of Japan, because apparently every country in the world calls it the Sea of Japan except one. You can guess which one. And so you got to call it the Sea of Korea. You know, actually, we got it a little bit in the Rise of Rome, because I had the Macedonian still as one of the bad guys for and it turned out that that time Greece was really concerned about the country of Macedonia, because they have a province called Macedonia, and so it was really political to have us have a civilization called Macedonia. Alexander the Great is Greek, they said, and I said, well, I mean, the Greeks at the time didn't think he was, but who cares? If Alexander is a Greek, shouldn't you be happy because we have two Greek civs? The regular Greeks and the Macedonians. No, that didn't make them happy, right? Because you can't make those guys happy. Eventually, I had to get what am I going to call these guys? What am I going to do with them? So I said, you know what? I looked up how many sales we had in Greece, and it was like 800 sales. And I said, you know what? I'm going to not care about these crazy Greeks. I think most Greeks are probably rational about this. And then it didn't matter because the Greek government passed a law that banned all video games in Greece. They were
Wait, when was this?
this is not by the year 2000. They were trying to ban gambling, online gambling. But the way they worded the law, it banned all video games. So then I said, there it is. You can't
Wow.
buy Age of Empires in Greece, so we don't care what they think.
So now you don't worry about what they think about the
Yeah,
Macedonians.
but I keep wondering if it had happened today, would have been a bigger deal. You know, look, when I was doing the Conquerors, not the Conquerors, the War Chiefs, Microsoft sent in a team of guys to blast me for having Indian civs, Native American civs. I said, why is this bad? And they said it's bad because in the original Age of Empires 3, as you know, you can't exterminate the natives. They have their little villages, right? That you get trading posts, but you couldn't destroy them. But if you're playing the Iroquois or the Aztecs, you can destroy them. And they said, so that was bad. I said, I think it empowers them. They said, oh, you can't. And no, of course, none of these guys are Native Americans. So we said, let's ask the Native Americans. And the great thing is that they'd already asked Native Americans on Age 3 what they thought of the game. And they had a report that they'd given us. And we took their own report and said, says here, they want to be playable civs. They want to stand or fall on their own merits, and be destroyable and be able to destroy. And they were like, we said that? We said, this is what you sent us after Age 3, and we're doing it. And now you're saying we're bad, because you couldn't win with these guys. And so then they kind of went back in shame. But I kind of get the impression now from guys who are still in the industry that kind of political stuff is weightier than it was in the past, so.
Man, I guess pretty heavy thumb on the scale, trying to influence how you make your games. I'm
Yeah.
assuming.
And it has nothing to do with the people. I mean, I would guess that the vast majority of people, like, take the Greek thing. Most of them would just want to play the game. They're excited to fight the Macedonians or be the Macedonians. They don't care about the politics. But these few people that care about the politics, who are people that wouldn't buy the game anyway, right? That's the thing that kills me. The guys who are complaining about this aren't people who are going to play the game. They are fans of the game. They just want to be involved in politics. So, like, I especially shouldn't care about them, but the guys in suits and ties care about them because that's their job, I guess. Anyway, it's sad. I'm
Mm.
happy to be back doing tabletop board games where my politics hopefully will be less viewed. But
Yes, with
and I'm not
im-
complaining because the politics weren't really that big a deal when I was doing video games. I did them up to 2009, and it hadn't got to the point that it really was interfering much. I only have a few stories of these crazy things, but I think I get the impression now that it's a constant thing you have to keep in mind. And maybe that's
Gotcha.
because social media blows everything up and makes it seem bigger than it is.
Yeah, I
You
think
know,
so.
it may not actually be that big a deal.
So I have one final question for
Mhm.
you, and that is what I end every podcast with, asking every guest is: when you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
I think an issue that we don't talk about enough, because all the news medias get money from this not happening, is for us to be more open and kinder and accepting of other people's beliefs that differ from your own. When I worked at Ensemble Studios, the designer I shared my office with was 180 degrees different politics from me. He thought George Bush was not the devil, but he was bad. He was an atheist. But we got along. I liked him. David Leary was his name. He's a good designer. He respected and liked me. We found common ground. We were looking for that. Instead of looking for ways we were different, I could condemn him and he can condemn me. We looked for that common ground. And I think that is not done enough today.
I love that answer. That's a great answer. Well, Sandy Peterson, thank you so much for a fascinating interview, and thank you for making my, childhood and adolescent years come to life today.
Okay, so as my final gift to you, what is the next game design or Age of Empire essay you want me to write on X?
Ooh, let's say if you could, I don't know how to word this. If you could have like like Age of Empire, I don't know, whatever, like modern day, like how would you structure that? Does that make sense?
Yes, because we talked about that. But how we do like World War II through Vietnam.
Or
And
like
we never did it.
2025.
Oh yeah, okay, sure, for Modern 25. Okay, I will talk about that.
Awesome.
And
I really appreciate that.
Sandy of Cthulhu is my Patreon. If you want to get lots of ranting, I do an essay every week there. Um, on X, I'm also Sandy of Cthulhu, and you can follow me there and even subscribe to me. And my store, if you want to see I'm still doing games. For example, just released this one, an asymmetrical a game about outer space empire building. Takes a couple hours to play, up to 6 people. And these are all at shop.petersongames.com. Don't just go to petersongames.com because that will not get you to the shop, and you want the shop. And that's what I have to say.
Awesome.